If every American gun owner somehow came together and formed one giant army, could they actually defeat a real professional military? Not sniping from rooftops, not using home field advantage, just a straight-up fight. Flat open ground, no cities or hills. And there's one more rule. They only get privately owned weapons. No Abrams tanks or F-16 seconds appearing out of nowhere, and no help from the real U.S. military. So what happens if this American citizen army actually walks out onto that field? To answer that, we need to see what they really bring with them. U.S. civilians own roughly 400 million firearms, more guns than there are people, but ownership isn't evenly spread. A relatively small percentage of Americans own the majority of those guns. Surveys usually put the real number of individual gun owners at about 80 to 85 million people. Not all of them fight. You lose kids, the elderly, people who wouldn't go, people who physically can't. Once you filter all that out, you might end up with 10 to 20 million adults who could realistically show up. But that's pure speculation. Still, that's the largest pool of potential fighters in human history. That means AR-15 seconds and similar rifles, hunting rifles with good optics, shotguns, and pistols. Plenty of people also have plate carriers, night vision gear, thermal scopes, and civilian drones. And a decent number of them actually train on their own time. And there are some rare heavy weapons in private hands. Legally owned, belt-fed machine guns, a few dozen privately owned armored vehicles, mostly light with only a handful of running tanks. Some privately owned jets, usually older trainers with no weapons. But all of that is tiny compared to the scale of millions. You're not getting a 1,000-tank armored division. You're getting scattered museum pieces and hobby projects. So on the battlefield, this citizen army looks like this. Millions of lightly equipped infantry, a small scattering of machine guns, no meaningful artillery, almost no functioning armor, no real air power. And that matters, because now we look at the other side. Even a small, modern army has huge advantages. Soldiers who train together full-time, units that move and fight as teams, not as individuals. Officers and NCOs, sergeants who actually run day-to-day operations, coordinating large formations, armored vehicles that shrug off rifle fire, mortars and artillery that reach miles beyond small arms range, attack drones and, in many countries, helicopters, logistics, fuel, medics, mechanics, resupply, communications. On open, flat ground, those things matter even more. Tanks dominate flat terrain. Artillery dominates everything else. And air power punishes anyone who bunches up. So now, the real question. Who could the citizen army realistically defeat? There are 4 categories. Category A, tiny national armies. Let's start with the simplest category. Very small militaries with only a few thousand lightly equipped troops. Some countries really do have armies this small. Think places like Belize, Suriname, Guyana, Malta, Jamaica. These are real professional forces, but they're tiny. A few thousand soldiers with light vehicles, small arms, some mortars, and maybe a handful of patrol aircraft or helicopters, but nothing heavy. If you line up, say, 4,000 professional troops with a few armored cars and mortars against several million Americans with rifles and optics, including a lot of former military, on an open plain, numbers start to dominate. Those small armies would cause real casualties at the start. Professional soldiers with machine guns and mortars can tear apart large, poorly coordinated attackers. But they can't be everywhere. They have limited ammo, limited barrels, and limited manpower. Once the fight stretches across hundreds of thousands of shooters over a wide area, their firepower advantage gets swallowed by sheer numbers. In that matchup, the American citizen army probably wins, slowly and painfully, but eventually simply because of scale. So yes, there are a few national armies the citizen side could realistically overwhelm, but that's where the kind of easy wins end. By the way, perhaps you've noticed that lately, some of these scenarios would basically result in resetting civilization. And if society actually collapses, having a bunch of rifles isn't going to help you rebuild the internet or make medicine. That's actually why I picked up this thing. It's literally just called the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization. I decided to contact them and they were kind enough to sponsor this video. It literally looks like a piece of art. Just look at this thing. But inside, it's 400 pages of legit engineering. It breaks down how to build the modern world from scratch. Tools, radios, turbines, toothpaste. Really, everything we would need to rebuild civilization. It's all illustrated in this crazy cool style that mixes blueprints with art. But the main reason I'm obsessed with it is because I started noticing weird stuff in the margins. It turns out the whole book is actually a hidden treasure hunt. There are secret codes, like these little butterfly symbols that act as clues leading to a secret website. Apparently, only a handful of people in the world have ever solved the whole thing to join the Order of Seekers and win the real-life prize. I haven't cracked it yet, but it's honestly one of the most unique things I own. If you want to try and solve it or just want a killer gift for someone smart, grab a copy at the link below. Category B. Lightly Mechanized Armies. This is where things get interesting. Now we're talking about countries with 8,000 to 15,000 active troops, some armored cars, maybe a few tanks, basic artillery, and at least a small air force. This doesn't sound like much compared to millions of civilians, until you remember what heavy weapons do on open ground. A single platoon of real tanks changes a lot. Rifle bullets bounce off. Their main guns outrange every civilian weapon. They move fast. They fire explosives, not bullets. They don't care how many rifles are pointed at them. And behind them, real artillery, real logistics, real command structure. This is the gray zone. A fight civilians might win in theory, but only if everything goes right and the opposing army has no depth. They would need some way to coordinate millions of people, enough discipline to spread out instead of crowding together and getting wiped out by artillery in one hit, enough privately owned heavy weapons to threaten armor. And that last part simply isn't there. Legal civilian ownership of modern anti-tank weapons is basically zero. Private tanks are mostly demilitarized displays that would break under real combat. And building anti-armor capability on the spot is fantasy under these rules. So against even a modest modern army with a few tanks and real artillery, the citizen army's chances drop sharply. They still have the numbers, they still have good marksmanship, but the other side can hit from kilometers away, move in armored formations, and call in air support when needed. On open terrain, you most likely can't outshoot tanks with rifles. Category C. Normal modern armies. Now we get to what most people imagine when they say a real army. Countries like Denmark, Portugal, Czech Republic, Mexico, or South Africa. These militaries have real tank fleets, mechanized infantry, full artillery battalions, attack aircraft and helicopters, professional logistics networks. At this point, the civilian army doesn't stand a chance in a straight fight. That doesn't matter whether they bring 5 million people or 15 million. Most of those fighters will never get close enough to shoot at anything. They'll be sitting miles back while the front line gets torn apart by artillery, drones, and armored pushes. This is where the whole millions versus thousands argument falls apart. Huge numbers can overwhelm tiny armies, but numbers alone can't beat modern combined arms warfare without heavy weapons of their own. They don't replace armored divisions, artillery regiments, air forces, logistics, engineers, medics, or command structure. Category D. Major powers. And once you jump one more level up France, the UK, Germany, Turkey, South Korea, India, China, the whole debate becomes meaningless. These militaries have dozens to hundreds of tanks, long-range rocket artillery, precision air power, attack helicopters, integrated command systems, surveillance drones, armored brigades, massive logistics. A force made almost entirely of light infantry is just a giant target. These armies wouldn't just win, they would dominate the field to a point where the outcome stops being a contest. And remember, the scenario forbids guerrilla warfare, home court advantage, cities, mountains, ambushes, or anything civilians would normally rely on. This is a clean, open plain, the worst possible place for light infantry. So, what's the real answer? If we stick to the rules, the honest answer looks like this. The American citizen army could defeat a few of the world's smallest, least equipped militaries. They might also grind out a win against a slightly larger, still lightly mechanized force, but only if a lot goes their way, and only at massive cost. Once real tanks, real artillery, and real aircraft enter the fight, the advantage flips completely. Numbers and rifles can only take you so far. They matter a lot, but they don't replace armored divisions, artillery regiments, air forces, logistics, engineers, medics, or command structure.